Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Thank you for stopping by. I'll just alert you to that interview I did on Monday where we talked about many issues, this insecurity, Safaricom results, where I said I'd expected a big bounce, which we're getting now. If you're going to have a look at that, it's the first item on Rich Wrap-Ups. My macro thoughts remain with the dollar. And I'll go back to that comment I made, but I made a series of them on the 29th of September. The point I'm making is that the dollar has just started getting going. I said then there will be blood in the water, and there is a small window if we want to be the sharks. I'd like to thank Johnny and Lavinia Beveridge for the lovely dinner last night at theirs, and Karen. It was a pleasure catching up with a bunch of interesting folks, including Robert Devereaux, Ludo and Dodo, and even Dudu, among others. And you can play with the linguistics any which way you wish, with Ludo and Dodo and Dudu. And Ludovico had been to see the gorillas. Ludo had been to see the gorillas in Rwanda, and he showed me this photograph. I said, please forward it to me. It's an extraordinary position that you see the gorilla in, and it's very eye-catching, obviously. Going back to Pablo Neruda, I want to do with you what spring does with the cherry trees. Rather good, I thought. Going back to Africa Confidential, they're saying the overthrow of Blaise Compaoré sends a powerful message from the street to other leaders planning to extend their rule. One of Africa's canniest operators, Blaise Compaoré, was forced out of power on the 31st of October, as over 100,000 protesters in Ouagadougou and Bobo Dioulasso demanded his exit. Unable to trust anyone to protect him from prosecution after 27 years of corrupt and brutal rule, Compaoré had gambled on his ability to persuade the political class and his presidential guard to back him for another term in office. I'll put up a photograph of him, and my conclusions are this: that the speed of the unravelling was breathtaking. Mobilizing 100,000 people in Ouagadougou is no small thing, and confirms the degree of escape velocity required in these situations where the street is seeking to overthrow the leader. Washington Post is talking about how many African leaders seek to extend their time in power. There is a whole list of who has served most. And I think Ouagadougou changes a lot of calculations. The Republicans captured control of the Senate in US midterm elections, rolled up big victories on Tuesday, seized control of the US Senate in midterm elections. That tipped the balance of power away from President Obama and will complicate his remaining 2 years in office, I think particularly around foreign policy. In my view, is President Obama has taken a very aggressive line against Russia and China with this pivot. But the risk now is that this harder line turns even harder, hardens further. Voters unhappy with Obama, worried about the economy, consumer confidence levels are very high, so this is a little bit of a disconnect, and weary of partisan gridlock in Washington, gave Republicans a majority in both chambers of Congress for the first time since elections in 2006. The president, in my view, is now largely triangulated by the Republicans. Barack Obama, I'll put up a photograph of him playing with Bo, the Obama family dog, aboard Air Force One. There's been a lot of reporting around this Facebook experiment, but let's touch on it briefly. Facebook boosted 2012 US election turnout of 300 basis points via psychology experiment, they say. Manipulated the news feeds of almost 2 million American users during the 2012 presidential election without telling them. The manipulation led to a 3% increase in voter turnout, according to the company's own data scientist. In a stunning revelation, the 3 months prior to Election Day in 2012 saw Facebook tweak the feeds of 1.9 million Americans by sharing their friends' hard news posts rather than the usual personal posts. These results suggest that the emotions expressed by friends via online social networks influence our own moods, constituting, to our knowledge, the first experimental evidence for massive-scale emotional contagion via social networks, and providing support for previously contested claims that emotions spread via contagion through a network, according to a paper published in the June edition of the journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Scientists. And I think that's the important point, the ability to spread contagion. And that takes me back to Virilio and his images contaminate us like viruses. And then I saw this tweet some time ago, but I haven't put it on Rich Wrap-Ups, and I put it today. It's of Jose Mujica, the president of Uruguay, descending from his motorcade to vote in elections for his successor. And I wish more leaders would take his approach. Currency markets, the euro back above 125 at 125.24, dollar index 87.22, but the big move within that dollar index has been the yen. Japanese yen 114.29 last, touched 114.48, which is the weakest level since December 2007. And it's at a 30-year low versus the Swiss franc. Swissy 0.9614, the pound 159.54, it's steadily losing its hold on 160. Aussie below at 0.87 at 0.689. India rupee 61.39. South Korean won at a fresh low 1082.76. Rial holding below 250 at 249.67. Egyptian pound where it's been 715.34, and the rand softer at 11.1163. The yen has fallen 5.1% in the past 3 months and is the worst performer of 10 developed nation currencies tracked by Bloomberg. Dollar top performer, rising 7.1%, while the euro dropped 0.4%. The Bloomberg dollar spot index, which tracks the currency against 10 major peers, advanced 0.3% to 1088.83, heading for the highest close since April 2009. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index, and as you know by now, I think it's exiting a multi-year disequilibrium and therefore has plenty of headroom. Euro dollar was last at 125.24. I think that's headed to 120. And then parity. The yen, of course, is bolstering the Nikkei, which closed at its highest level since October 2007. Commodities, I wrote the piece over the weekend, the commodity supercycle is dead in the water, which it is. Crude oil, put up a 5-day chart, $76.80, 60, increasingly looks like a shoe-in. My outlier objective, $50, might well come into play. I'll put up a 6-month chart as well, take you back to that piece I wrote about who kneecapped oil. I said I've followed the oil market for eternity, and the recent price action is best characterized as unprecedented and white knuckle. In fact, the oil market has always been very high beta and exhibits magnified price reactions to the demand and supply dynamic. Where markets are net short, price setting can be determined by the last buyer who is paying up in a net supply deficit scenario. And that's why you saw those big price spikes around futures expiry when the market was short. However, this is a binary thing in a situation where there is a net surplus, which is the situation we find ourselves in now. The price setter can be those last sales transacted at deep discounts. The conditions are optimal for a complete washout. In my day, that would be called a blow-off bottom. Down as far as $50 a barrel. The big game changer has been US crude output, which rose from 5.7 million barrels a day in 2011 to 8.88 million barrels a day in early October, which was the most since March 1986. OPEC also increased output by 402,000 barrels a day. That was in September. We know Iran and Saudi Arabia continue to offer their oil at the deepest discount since 2008. Essentially, the global system is awash in oil, and the US has displaced a lot of imports. and those displaced barrels are being offered at fire sale prices. I asked the question, who kneecapped oil, and the answer to that question is President Obama and his administration. In fact, as long ago as 2011, Thomas Donilon, who was then a US National Security Advisor, was signaling this, and very clearly. America's new energy posture allows us to engage from a position of greater strength. Increasing US energy supplies act as a cushion that helps reduce our vulnerability to global supply disruptions and price shocks. It also affords us a stronger hand in pursuing and implementing our international security goals. In particular, it's putting phenomenal pressure on Russia, Iran as well, Venezuela. The US administration has turned price slasher, and like in Alfred Hitchcock's movie Psycho, oil has been sliced up real good. The US has flooded the oil market, and the commodity is now a geopolitical spear, which was the terminology Michael Clark and Tom Engelhardt have used. It is the US that is the new price setter for the oil markets, and this is a deep and important geopolitical development. The new price levels will have immediate and enormous geopolitical and financial knock-on effects. It will place intolerable pressure on oil producers, and particularly those operating from a higher base price. It is not too difficult, I said then, to calculate who are the biggest losers in this new price normal, and Vladimir Putin's Russia springs to mind first. China, of course, are seeing a significant benefit, but the pivot to Asia is all about a naval blockade strategy aimed at cutting China off from its imports of crude oil, and their demand for crude oil continues to expand. The Emirates chief executive, Tim Clark, was interviewed by Der Spiegel about MH370. He said, "It's anybody's guess who did that. My point is that Barack Obama has taken control of the crude oil cockpit. He is in charge of the aeroplane. He has control of all the instruments, and it has been a wild ride for the last few weeks, which could get a whole lot wilder." I'll put up a 6-month chart of gold. I think it's going below $1,000, and I said that in the commodities super cycle is dead in the water. Coming to Africa, the Zambian minister has been reinstated as party chief after protests. Zambia's interim president, Guy Scott, reversed his dismissal of Defense Minister and presidential frontrunner Edgar Lungu as the ruling party's Secretary General on Tuesday after the sacking triggered protests. Scott told state-owned ZNBC Radio he had rescinded his order a day after making it, but did not spell out the reasons for his change of mind. Police in Lusaka fired tear gas to stop protests by students and PF members against Lungu's dismissal on Monday night, so it was quite a reaction. Moving on to Ebola. File viruses like Ebola edit genetic material as they invade their hosts, according to a study published this week in mBio, the online open access journal of the American Society for Microbiology. Their results highlight regions in Ebola and Marburg virus RNAs where the polymerase of the virus, a protein that synthesizes the viral RNA, stutters at specific locations, adding extra nucleotides, molecules that form the building blocks of genetic material like DNA and RNA, thereby editing the new RNAs. The study found new features at a described RNA editing site in the Ebola glycoprotein RNA, which makes the protein that coats the surface of the virus. Their work also identified less frequent but similar types of editing events in other Ebola and Marburg virus genes. The first time this has been demonstrated, because of these messenger RNA modifications, Ebola and Marburg are potentially making proteins that we previously didn't realize, as Christopher F. Basler, PhD, senior study author and professor of microbiology at Mount Sinai. The bottom line is that we know these changes occur, but we do not know yet what it really means in the biology of the virus, Basler says. There are many aspects of how the viruses replicate that aren't yet understood, he said, so we need a complete description of how they grow to develop new strategies used to treat the infections. And I wrote about this on the 20th of October when I said, the severity of Ebola lies in the speed of infections. I was talking about what Virilio calls the escape velocity, and saying that, it's all about acceleration and speed in the 21st century and how viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics. And I was saying we've not entered the parabolic phase yet, when the escape velocity is at its fastest, and therefore the comparison with malaria and influenza might make a nice infographic, but it's an irrelevant comparison. And then I was referring to what is being referred to in that piece in MBio, which is the non-linear and exponential rate of mutation of the Ebola virus, gives the tail risk real bite. Put up an image of the Ebola virus, a link to the piece I wrote on the 18th of August when I said viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics, and a piece on the 25th of August when I said the Ebola virus continues to gain velocity. Have a look at the second half of the inside story I did about this some weeks ago when I touched on these very points. And then I'll put up an image of the Ebola check at Jomo Kenyatta Airport. Dangote Cement Sierra Leone expansion is delayed by Ebola outbreak. This is on Bloomberg. And there are also Dangote Cement seeking a license for a 75 megawatt power plant in Tanzania. South African oil shares up 7.635% in 2014, has bounced 3,115 points since October the 15th. We've had a good rebound, but it might run out of puff. It touched 50,000 yesterday, which was after quite a long time, but has not managed to hold. Dollar rand 11.1477. I think it's headed to 12. Egyptian pound extremely steady at 7.15. Egyptian stock market up 40.519% this year, and back within just 281 points of a multi-year high from September the 30th. Nigeria all shares at 13-month lows. It's down 11.093%. I wrote about this on the 27th of October when I said the lowest fuel price in almost 4 years. Oil price is weighing big time on African oil producers such as Nigeria, where the naira has been wobbling. Boko Haram have attacked a town and a French-owned factory in northeast Nigeria. Suspected Boko Haram gunmen launched a series of attacks in Nigeria's restive northeast on Tuesday, opening fire on troops in one town before raiding a French-owned factory in another. The violence in Gombe State came just after midday and began with a gunfight at a military checkpoint on the outskirts of Nafada town. Multiple residents said Islamists overwhelmed the soldiers before entering Nafada, where they set fire to a police station, robbed a bank and razed a political party office. They then drove in 4x4 trucks and on motorcycles to the town of Ashaka, 20 kilometers away, where the French industrial giant Lafarge has a cement plant. Staff at the Ashaka plant said French nationals were on site at the time of the raid, but there was no firm evidence about their condition, with the security forces and officials in Gombe unavailable to comment. The twin attacks underscored the worsening security situation in the northeast, where violence has continued at a relentless pace despite government claims of a truce with the Islamist rebels. They came in large numbers in vans and on motorcycles, shouting Allahu Akbar, God is greater, said Nafada resident Abu Bakr Galda in an account supported by other locals and a rescue worker. It is not clear if the expatriates also ran along with other senior staff, Wunti told AFP. No one knows the fate of the expatriates. That's quite alarming, isn't it? Bartier tells Africa operations continue to disappoint in Q2. The volumes, or the number of minutes carried on the company's mobile network in the region, grew by only 4% year-on-year. Voice ARPU fell by 12% in dollar terms. The non-voice revenues have been growing at a healthy pace. Overall growth rates were pulled down by the voice business. On a year-on-year basis, EBITDA of the African business fell by 11% in dollar terms, and 14% in rupee terms. The region accounts for about a fifth of Bharti Airtel's overall profit. There's a row brewing in Tanzania about natural gas investment. Officials have been arrested, and there's plenty of concern at the moment. Political row over contracts to extract some of Tanzania's extensive natural gas reserves, culminating with the arrest of 2 state officials this week, threatens to complicate and delay billions of dollars of investment into the sector. You got ExxonMobil, Statoil, BG Group off air. But on Monday, 2 senior officials at the state-owned entity that partners with the energy companies were arrested for refusing to comply with demands from Tanzanian lawmakers to release details of 26 contracts known in the industry as PSAs, production sharing agreements. The chairman and DG of the Tanzanian Petroleum Development Corporation were later released by police after several hours in detention. Industry executives in Dar es Salaam are already worried about the impact of the political climate, the delays over the new constitution, the elections, the lack of clarity around the gas policy is really holding back decisions from oil companies. Coming to Kenya, Safaricom, I went to the first half earnings release yesterday, and they're very strong. Earnings per share up 32.14%. First half revenue up 14.6%. Profit before tax up 32.7%. EPS up 32.1%. Cash at the end of the reporting period 30.48 billion versus 19.8 billion the time before. Customers eked out a 4.9% gain to 21.85 million. Quite a few were taken off the network when that registration process went on. Mobile data customers active in the last 30 days, that's up 23.9%. M-Pesa customers up 10.8%. Revenue up 14.6%. Voice revenue up 6.4%, which is quite a turnout when you consider the price slippage we've seen over this period. Mobile data revenue, the standout, plus 52.9%. M-Pesa revenue up 24.7%. And plenty of positive things in this. They've created a savings product called Lockbox Service. They have 3.1 million smartphone users on the network now, and that represents this mobile data uptake. I'll put up some photographs I interviewed Bob straight after. We'll be uploading that hopefully by tomorrow, that interview, which went out on a live feed. Earnings per share 37 cents a share versus 28 cents, and Kui took a photo of me whilst I was waiting to hear the results. Will they beat the result? These results beat the street by a wide margin. The share price is up. Outliers mobile data. M-Pesa might see some margin compression in the second half, but these were real muscular results. And then this morning I saw Safaricom tweeted that today marks yet another milestone to the story of M-Pesa. This is an M-Pesa MoneyGram launch where you can send money from via MoneyGram into Kenya, where it connects with M-Pesa. So I think very strong results and interesting comments saying, we're not in a war. This was Nicholas Nganga, the chairman. I think I think the market had become a little bit too negative in the face of an onslaught by James Mungi's PR machine, and there's a lot more headroom. We don't know the names, we don't have their identities, we just took the prints to check who they are. No one has claimed the bodies, and we are still waiting. Investigators Tuesday lifted fingerprints from the bodies of the 7 men who were gunned down as they tried to raid the Nyali military barracks in Mombasa. It's simply unprecedented, and I grew up not far from the Nyali Golf Club, so this is pretty alarming. Then we learned that a pro-government Sheikh Salim Bakari Morangi was shot and killed in Likoni while leaving Bilal Mosque after prayers. Earlier this year I was sitting on the Likoni ferry deep in the milieu of the overwhelming tide of humanity, and I didn't feel safe at all. I'll put up a photograph of the ferry and the Likoni Channel taken 265 days ago. The sharp fall in oil prices will see super petrol prices below 100 shillings per litre before year end. This will prove a positive catalyst for Kenyan consumer. Kenyan shilling at 89.642. This is the weakest in 2014. Nairobi all share up 16.055%, but it's 4.146% below a record set in September. NSE 20 up 4.567% and 255 points below a 2014 high set in September. Kenya's Pan-Africa Insurance says it's seeking a stake in Gateway. The shares rallied. Gateway Insurance is a privately held insurance company. Pan-Africa is controlled by Sanlam. East African's life insurance business has been growing at 20% per year. Apparently, we saw Prudential. You remember that interview I did with them? They've come in. I think it is one of the big Swiss Re, I think, has come in as well. And then we've had activity from local operators. I said it's a red-hot sector, and clearly there are a lot of acquisition activities. Most of the global insurance companies are looking to enter the market. Pan-Africa is up 35.555% in 2014, but reported softer first-half earnings. That link is on the website if you care to have a look at it. I'll take my leave at this point. Thank you for stopping by, and if you've listened through this, you deserve a medal.